What's going on, Bellfleur? Gwen the Recovering Witcher, also known as Jen. Welcome to my channel and thanks so much for clicking on this video. This is episode 4 of Mindful Recovery Mondays, where on this segment for right now, for the next couple weeks, I will be covering the Pagan and Recovery book by Dierdre and Hebert, and I am covering step 2 today. Hopefully it won't take as long as step 1 did, which it was the couple videos from the last 2 weeks. So I kind of went over the foreword, the introduction, and step 1. Again, I hope this interests you. I appreciate everyone who's left a comment about me sharing my experience, strength, and hope. That does really mean a lot to me. Not only does this help me, if it helps you in some way, then my purpose is being fulfilled. I get excited when I talk about that. It makes me feel like a hope dealer. So let's dive into step 2. Step 2 is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I have to say personally, I'm always still looking for those few missing marbles that have been gone so long ago. I will have to say after 3 years, it's been, man, I keep saying the 3 years, but this January has been 3 years and 6 months. It's been 3.5 years. And before you know it, it's going to be July again, and there's the time. So it is possible. It is possible. But yeah, I don't feel as like a big hot mess. I don't feel as scattered as I have been. Now it's really just more of tackling things in everyday life and how to navigate that. Not manage the unmanageable. It's really just navigating. I like that. I do have to say that when I'm starting to feel the unmanageability part, it is really of my own making. I don't know if anybody else can relate. Raise your hand. And I was reading Hebert's first couple lines out of step 2 out of that chapter. She said that step 2, she calls this a marking of the first minefield for the pagan in recovery. And I was like, well, I think we've hit 2 minefields before hitting this one. I mean, one, I wasn't thinking I was going to walk into a 12-step meeting. That was the first minefield. I was afraid to step anywhere, and then realizing I should probably go back. And then 2, admitting the powerlessness and the unmanageability. It was just like, yeah. So I'm going to say there's many minefields in this. Overall, in her point with this chapter, she was talking about if you're either pagan, Wiccan, heathen, however you want to identify yourself, at some point, whoever is in the program, and again, I have to mention, when I say we, I'm not talking about we as a collective, I'm talking about we as people in the program. So again, if you're watching, please do not be offended. We, us, they is used heavily in the 12-step recovery books, unless you're in codependent. That I still think they still do, but that's besides the point. We turn away from the Christian faith for some reason, and we have some baggage in there about that with the Christian faith. If somebody attends meetings pretty regular like I do, you're going to hear a lot of religious speech. I know when I started, I was pretty agnostic. I identified as Catholic because that's what I grew up with. Then eventually down the line, being in the rooms for some time, not that I'm an old timer, but at some point, your spiritual experiences or awakenings, they start to, or in my opinion, from my experience, they had started to heighten. A lot of the things that I experienced in childhood started to come back. Because I think as far as scientific studies, they did say that when you do get off alcohol for some time, it could take about maybe at least 1.5 years to close to 2 years for your mind to kind of detox and really start seeing a little bit more clearly as to things and what's happening, or your sentences are super heightened versus like the whole pink cloud thing. When I started, I was agnostic and I had some idea of a God of my understanding. And I thought, and y'all know this, you can go back to the first video. I thought I was gonna, when I went down this path as a witch, because again, as my abilities started to get a little bit stronger, again, that I had blocked off for so many years, um, I was gonna identify as a Christian witch. Again, there are Christian witches out there. That is no offense. Again, it just didn't seem like it was something that worked out for me because of the more that I researched. It was a good starting point from what I had learned. And again, when I started going down this path and wanting to be identified as pagan, um, I went down the path of what I learned from my mother and what I had seen. And again, a lot of it is very Catholic based. And I think the more that I read, and I think as some subscribers who are part of identify as Wiccan or pagan, we choose this path because there is something that does rub us off the wrong way, about maybe a certain religion that we grew up with. The more that I read, it was kind of like you find out everything. I learned from my mom's culture practices and traditions, and even a part of Celtic heritage, which I had no idea about, until my brother had our did a DNA test as far as like our ancestry, where that comes from. Um, quite frankly, I got a little pissed off. I got pissed off about how religion and federal governments and coming in and suppressing. I mean, we read this in history books, but when you read about it and see how it fits in with your bubble, it gets a little personal. And again, these laws were enforcing that whatever a society was then, whatever their traditions or practices were, what their spiritual teachings were, that had to stop, and they had to conform. They had to conform to the Christianity aspect, or they had to go into Catholicism. So a lot of the people that were the indigenous people, they went into hiding on what they were really doing, and you still see it in different countries. And that's why executions happened. That's why clearly sometimes some of us don't want to get out of the broom closet, so to speak. You know, even reading into the Celtic practice, when Christianity was taking over, and there's not a whole lot of literature, especially with my deity, because things were rewritten. Um, you can't help but feel a little upset. As I mentioned, some countries, when those rules and regulations come in, you know, some of these bans or laws about witchcraft being prohibited, I mean, this is still going on, but some countries, they just lifted the ban in the 1950s. It's really not that long ago. I mean, it's almost kind of like finding out the moment, like what you learned in school when you were a kid, and then Thanksgiving and really what Thanksgiving was, and then also about Christmas and Jesus. Like, like, where does it end? Okay. I haven't laughed in a few days. I when I start getting in it and I get in this talk about it, I can't help but get a little heated, and like I probably should work a 4 step on it. We're getting there. Don't worry, we're getting there. I get so when I start learning more, obviously, and that's what happens when you wake up, and it's you get a little pissed off, and I don't like being controlled personally. I don't like suppression of any form at all. I don't like the control. I don't like being muzzled. And yeah. I'm going to stop. And yes, but anybody who does identify as a Christian witch, by all means, that works for you. This is your own personal journey. I highly recommend you stay on that path if that's what you feel comfortable with. Just for me, I couldn't navigate the two. I have high respect for the saints and the Bible, because the Bible is a pretty it's a pretty magical book. It is a whole lot of witchcraft in there itself. So still work with angels and all that. So again, any help that I can get is great, y'all. It's great. We go into talking about freedom. All right, so where is the freedom? And Herbert reminds us that the 12 steps never intended to be a religious program. And I've said that from the very beginning, that going into Bill's story, Bill Wilson. The Alcoholic Anonymous book, it covers that in We Agnostic. And the chapter of Bill's story, he's sitting at the kitchen table with his buddy Ebby, and he hasn't seen Ebby in a long time. They were drinking buddies, and Ebby is stone cold sober, and he wants to spread the message. And Bill's just kind of sitting there, and he's drinking, and he's just like, this boy's on fire. Like, like literally on fire. He's on a roll. Bill's asking him, like, hey, what's going on with you? What are you doing? And homeboy, he's just on fire, and he's like, man, I've got religion. And Bill's like, nah. This is based on his prior experience with what he grew up with and his life and past teachings. Ebby has this very profound statement, which I think for me personally in the rooms, or anybody else that can attest to that, when you read it in Bill's story, when Ebby says, why don't you choose a God of your understanding? And that I can do. That I can do. For the most part, in my experience with 12-step meetings, they really adhere to that fact. What I've seen is where the detachment comes from is where maybe starting working with sponsorship based on what the sponsor believes in and what the sponsee is trying to get at and trying to make that work, which I will get into that in other videos. So this brings us to the next point of the issue, which is belief. In the book, she says, lives left unmanageable and without power might quickly give away to hopelessness and desperation. So step 2 calls us to recognize that there truly is hope. Applying this statement personally to myself, I had lost hope in myself. Everything that I was trying to do myself by self-will, it just was not working. If I see someone who has achieved something that I am trying to achieve and I have not done that yet, the logical thing to do would be to ask, how did you do it? It gets down to the point of, if I'm not able to, and me asking someone else, it's me getting outside of myself. Me getting outside of myself, of stop thinking about myself for a minute and asking somebody else what their opinion is, or how did they do it, or what the steps that they took. I like the point was made that with pagans in recovery, which I didn't even think about this, but pagans, we typically like the structure of a circle. And either way, when we go back around, we always start at the very beginning. And this is how Hebert was applying it, is that if we go out, meaning going in the same direction of a circle, depending on what the starting point is, we will still always come back and go back to ourselves and finding an answer within. Also, she refers to as balance, which we all know I'm all trying to be about the balance this year. But in my personal findings as a pagan witch, when it comes to me looking at gods and goddesses that provide and show us the balance in nature, so for those of us in the program, we turn to deities, or even those who are not in a program, we turn to specific deities that that have that sort of balance in nature, who have mastered it, and this is what they rule over to help balance and restore our instincts that have gone awry. So then she goes into a portion of finding belief within us. I'm going to keep this brief because this part of the book, I can see where she's coming from. But then again, it's also kind of like that tough love aspect. Plus, I don't want to give you all the goodies because, again, what else would I talk about on Mindful Recovery Mondays if I gave you all the goods right up front? Some of us might not be ready for it. Some of us might be, but I do feel like at times this might be the critical step of where you can kind of lose someone. I have been in the rooms to where, again, not being in there very long, I have seen people die. not physically in front of me, but I have known people that have passed in the program. She did have some valid points. I guess me personally, I probably would have worded it a little bit differently. She makes a statement about many of us believing that we are special cases and the program won't work. I get that, feeling like the sense of the unicorn, kind of, so to speak. Again, I have talked about the three things that in order for this program to work, this is what is indispensable to me. To be honest, open-minded, and willing. It says it out of the big book that I first used out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think those are super, super vital. It seems like that's what has been working so far. I do have to find that we need to be patient with ourselves, which I'm still working on with that. Accepting help from others, sometimes that's still, again, from past teachings of what we're taught, of maybe not even asking for help, coming off weak or whatever. It's still kind of going back into step one. Are you willing? See what I did there? Are you willing to try and ask for help, do something different versus not saying anything? And in the fear of looking silly or seeming weak or whatnot, have you. And it's really about sticking with the slogan of one day at a time. Sometimes it is just an hour at a time, a minute at a time, a second at a time, but just staying with the one day at a time. Practical application. As human beings, we always want proof. We like the logic of things. We need to have the facts. We need to be able to measure in order for our minds to register what we can understand and build some sort of conclusion that, yes, this makes sense and this fits and that's totally logical because we have the proof, right? The book talks about if you sit in a meeting long enough and identify more than try to find the differences, I can see past the reasons of the why this won't work for me. And I will focus more on if I compare myself with a person versus looking for the differences, then I know that I can get closer to the hope that this is going to work. So then we get down to step 2 for ritual, and it asks us who is reading this book to find a forest that is away from the city and where you don't really have much traffic, a lot of noise, if possible. And you're going to meditate on what force it might be that keeps all of Earth's creatures sustained. This goes to the point that each creature instinctively knows that something is going to provide for them, so they don't despair because they have a trust. It's a blind faith that they have. They're like the birds. They know that they're going to get up and eat in the morning. They probably have already found places where they typically migrate to or hang out, whether it be like a Walmart a parking lot and being a happy little bird and finding a French fry, and but they don't worry about it. They know that they're going to be provided for. I have not done this ritual yet. This was just to prove a point that we don't have to define it or prove anything to anybody about the trust. It just is. So I know that I will be working on this ritual in the next couple days, and probably getting some footage for you guys and what my time and what I thought about it and what I got out of it. Because again, I have mentioned, and I'll probably mention it again, this is not a one-time deal with me going through the steps again. It helps me to connect with my practice and how to incorporate it and try to get a better understanding. This was it for step 2. It's something I'm still working on. And I did get a comment, one more thing before I close up. I got a comment, I won't say the name as who, and I tried to reach back out. But I do want to say that if there is someone who is trying to figure out what force, energy, or power it is, don't struggle with it at the first thing in the beginning. I took with what I knew or what I had, and lately I've gotten into conversations with other people about sometimes when we do walk on a blind faith, whatever is guiding us or whatever that may be or look like, more ends up being revealed over time. Don't get too stressed out or caught up in the why or who. the answers will come. I think there is always a force that kind of leads us in the right direction. And even though you might not have the answer now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have the answer. So don't stress too hard. And most likely the answer shows up when you're not even looking for it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the notification bell for new videos. I'll have a video uploaded for Wednesday. And yeah, I'll see you next week. All right. And please be sure to leave a comment because I'd love to hear from you. So anyway, take care and be well. Bye.